Welcome to my channel, Notorious Crafts. In this video, I will show you how you can make these miniature mushrooms using polymer clay. My channel is all things dollhouse and miniatures, as well as how to make them, so don't forget to subscribe. Here are some of the supplies that you will need to be able to make these. You will need some white clay, translucent clay, different types of clay tools like these dotting tools and ball tip tools, an X-Acto knife, some chalk pastels, and I got a large box of them in many different colors. I have a really small brush for some detail work and some oven bake clay adhesive. Also not pictured, I will be using some acorns that I found outside for the base. I start off by cutting a small piece of the white polymer clay, and then I'm going to mix it with some of the translucent clay. Translucent clay is really great for making miniatures look very realistic. I'm using my fingers to mix the clay together. I didn't want to take out my clay pasta machine since it's such a small amount of clay. After my clay is fully mixed, I cut off a really small piece and roll it into a ball. I do have some of these rubber finger gloves on so that I don't get any fingerprints in my clay. After the clay is rolled into a ball, I use my fingertips to squish one of the ends into a cone shape, and then I use the other finger to flatten the bottom. I then grabbed my round tip dotting tool and push it into the flat part of the cone to create a hole. I want it to be big enough to fit the stem of my mushroom, so I'm going to keep making it bigger. While I'm doing that, I'm making sure that it still has that cone mushroom shape at the top. And then I just continued that process over and over again. I did cut up a few more clay pieces so that I can make a lot more of these mushrooms, and I made each one a different size since I want all the mushrooms to be different sizes. Some of the mushroom caps did end up getting stuck to the top of my dotting tool, so that's when I just used my fingernail to gently push it off until it completely came off. I then took my red chalk pastel and used my X-Acto knife to scrape off a little bit into a fine powder, and I will use this to color my white clay, and that'll create the color of my mushroom cap. This is actually my first time trying this technique. I've seen it done online many times, so I'm really excited to see how it'll work. I did grab another red chalk pastel in a slightly different shade of red, so hopefully I can create some nice shading in different red shades on the mushroom cap. Using my cutting tool, I pick up each one of the mushroom caps one at a time to not break the shape that I created. I guess after I shaped them, I could have placed them directly onto my baking sheet, and that way I could have skipped this step. And now I'm ready to color the mushroom caps with the red powder I created with the chalk pastels. I'm starting off at the very top, and then towards the bottom of the mushroom cap, I'm going to apply less of the powder. I want a lot more red at the very top just to create some nice gradual shading. I'm also using the lighter shade of red towards the very bottom of the mushroom cap so that the darker color is on the top. You also have to do this step while the clay is still wet and before you bake. I did try doing it after and it did not stick to the clay. This is also a really great way to color your clay if you don't have a lot of colored clay available. And now it is ready to place in the oven to bake. And here's how the mushroom caps look after they're completely baked. The color does look like it changed after baking. It does look like it got a little bit darker and like it's a little bit orangey too. I'm using my brush to brush off some of the extra powder that got left over after baking. Now I'm rolling out some of the leftover clay that I had, and I'm going to use this to make the stems. I'm rolling it out into really thin strips, and then I'm going to cut that into much smaller pieces, and this will be turned into the stems. I'm making lots of different shapes and sizes to go with my various shapes of mushroom caps. And then now I'm grabbing some of my Bake Bond, and that is how I will attach the stem to the cap of the mushroom. I'm using a toothpick to grab a really small amount of this clay adhesive, and I'm putting it inside of the mushroom cap. And then I will place the stem of the mushroom inside. Next, I grab some of the acorns that I found outside, and I'm going to fill the inside with some brown clay to make it look like dirt. I'm using some of this clay adhesive from Sculpey, and I'm going to add it to the bottom of the acorn, and this will help attach my polymer clay to the acorn so that it doesn't later end up falling out. It is pretty much just a glue for clay. Now I'm adding my clay piece inside of the acorn. I'm just going to start pressing it in to fill up the entire acorn. And now I am using my dotting tool to press into the clay to give it some texture so that it can start looking like dirt. I am also using this wire tool that came inside of my clay tool kit, and I'm pressing it down into the clay so that it'll keep giving it some more texture. With my needlepoint tool, I'm pressing holes down into the clay, and this will create the holes where my mushroom will go. I added just a little bit of clay adhesive to the very tip of the mushroom stem, and then I inserted it down into the clay. I also added some of the clay adhesive inside of the mushroom cap, and I hope that will be able to hold together after it bakes. I then continued the process over and over again to fill up the entire acorn. I started with placing the largest mushroom in the back and center, and then the rest of the mushrooms will keep getting smaller and smaller. That's also why I created so many different sizes. With the smaller mushrooms, it was really helpful to use tweezers because the caps kept falling off. And now all of my mushrooms are set, and I'm going to, as gently as I can, place this in the oven and hope that none of the caps fall off during the baking process. Before I place it in the oven, I'm going to adjust some of these mushroom caps with my silicone tool. I don't want to use my finger so I don't disrupt any of the other mushrooms. Time to bake and for all of the clay to harden. While that first set is baking, I decided to make another set of mushrooms inside of an acorn since I had so many mushrooms left over. For this second set, I decided to pre-bake the mushrooms before I put them inside of the acorn to see if that'll work better. So I am putting some of the clay adhesive inside of the mushroom cap and then attaching the stem, and then I'm going to bake all of these. All of my mushrooms are baked and the stems are attached to the cap, so now I am placing all of these pre-baked mushrooms into the wet clay. So I'm poking some holes inside of the brown clay, and I repeated the same process as I did with the other acorn. I did find it much easier to have my mushrooms pre-made, so my stems already attached to the caps and then adding them inside of the wet clay. In the first one that I made, I was attaching the mushroom cap to the stem while it was inside of the acorn, and the mushroom caps kept falling off. So just a tip, attach the stem and the mushroom, bake it, and then attach it inside of the acorn. And then once this is done, I will place it inside of the oven to bake. I took the first set that I created out of the oven, and one of the mushrooms broke. So what happened was the cap from the mushroom next to it started sliding off, and the pressure ended up breaking the mushroom next to it. I added some really strong glue to the stem of the mushroom and then just a little bit on top of the cap. So I ended up just attaching the caps together as well as the stem back together and smooth out the clay so that you could not really see the glue as much. That is also why it is a good idea to pre-bake all of the mushrooms before you put them inside of the acorn. The mushrooms are very delicate to work with since I'm using very thin pieces of clay. Here's how both of my miniature mushrooms inside acorns look. I am so happy with how they turned out. They turned out a lot better than I thought they would. This was a first time making miniature mushrooms as well as using pastel with clay. I really love how realistic they look and how the shading of the pastel makes it look realistic too. Even the dirt looks like it is real. It was also a really good learning experience for me too. I know now to pre-make all of the mushrooms before I place them inside of the acorn. Let me know what you guys think of this project down below in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching and see you guys in the next video.